Thank God for the internet. This pandemic would be a lot worse if it weren't for the internet. The way that it has enabled us to communicate, government authorities, medical professionals, knowing what's going on around the world, has helped us to control the spread of the virus. And even in our own lives, being sequestered, required to stay at home, it's enabled us to communicate with friends and relatives, or even via this video, that it's hard to imagine what it would be like if we didn't have those capabilities. But of course, we know that with the internet, there's both good and bad. And I'm asking you, in a time when we're using the internet so much, to consider how God would have us to use the internet. As I said, the internet can be used for both good and bad. It's a morally neutral instrument. Just like the printing press, you can print good things or you can print bad things. Likewise, the internet. But we also need to ask that question personally. It can bring good into our lives, but it can also bring bad into our lives. We can use it for good, and we can use it for bad purposes as well. With great power comes great responsibility. We're stewards before God. He's given us a great tool in the internet, and with it comes great responsibility. So I think we should be asking the question, and this is in our own personal lives, how can I use the internet for God's glory? And what does it look like for me to use the internet as a faithful follower of Christ? Nowhere in the Bible, at least that I know of, does it address the internet. But I do think of a passage that I think can give us some insight here. In Peter's first letter to us, he, in the 4th chapter, talks about the end of all things. In chapter 4, verse 7, he says this: "The end of all things is near." Sometimes in the situation we're in now, it can feel like the end of the world is near. We can panic and be anxious about what's going to happen in the future. So I find it especially interesting what Peter has to say here when he introduces or gives us a prescription of how to act when the end of all things is near. He says this: "Therefore, be alert and of sober mind, so that you may pray." Be careful about panic. Be clear-minded. Be focused on doing the will of God, on being faithful to Him, on praying, not just for things, but praying so that you might know the will of God and be faithful to it. Now notice how practical he is as he goes on from here. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. I think that's a key for us when we think about the internet and our use of it. Peter goes on, "If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To Him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen." So, how can I use the gift, the internet, how can I use the gift I have received to serve others as a faithful steward of God's grace in its various forms? This reminds me of a book by Quentin Schultz entitled Habits of the High-Tech Heart. He addresses this issue, and he says the key is humility. Humility asks us to justify our technological decisions, not on the basis of what they do for our egos, but on the basis of caring for others. Humility is a crucial virtue in the age of cyberspace. Humility leads to a healthy skepticism and even a reticence, a willingness, when appropriate, to say no to some technologies or to particular uses of them, while remaining grateful for those that help us to live more fully as virtuous stewards of our time and talents. Today, the concerns of information technology can distract us even from the responsibilities of neighborly love. Digital messaging offers us a tremendously seductive diversion that seems to meet our every desire. The virtue of humility directs us away from selfish cyber desires and toward the needs of our neighbors. Even in a high-tech society, being humble means taking on the burdens of a broken creation rather than merely satisfying one's personal desires. So, how do I use the internet for God's glory? What does it look like to use the internet as a faithful follower of Christ? It looks like humility. I will use the internet to truly, selflessly serve others as a faithful steward of God's grace in its various forms. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. That is what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, not to be served, and then to give away his life in exchange for many who are held hostage. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another.